Well, thank you and welcome to everyone who's joining us virtually today. I am Carissa Miller. I'm the CEO of the Council of Chief State School Officers, and I'm joined today on this for this panel with chiefs from Kentucky, the District of Columbia, Indiana, and Tennessee. I'm so happy to be having this conversation. I want to thank the Reagan Institute for their partnership and for the ongoing conversations around how we come to solutions together. They have been a great partner to all of us, and we're happy to be here for that reason. I want to just give us a little context for this conversation because we're going to cover a gamut of things, but there's no way we can get into everything that these incredible state leaders are doing. So the RISE panel has talked about 3 different ways of connecting, and that's kind of what we're going to focus on today. The first one is connecting through devices, through the electronic medium, through broadband. The second one is making sure that we're connecting on the human level and addressing mental health needs, both for teachers, students, and actually any of us who have survived through the pandemic. And the third one is the connections across agencies. We found that so important during the pandemic, and it's been ongoing, and it's showed us how much more we can achieve when we work together across all of these agencies. So in that vein, I'm going to give just a little bit of context, and we're going to get to the conversation with these incredible chiefs. The Elementary and Secondary School Relief Fund, also known as ESSER, because we give everything an acronym in education, had 3 different tranches of money that it put forward. And it was a total of $190 billion to schools and states to address the impacts of COVID. 19 billion of that went directly to state education agencies to fund statewide initiatives, and state chiefs have been using those funds to address some of the needs that we're going to talk about today. So for example, states have committed more than $980 million of their state set aside for student and staff well-being and connections, professional training and student mental well health, hiring and retaining school psychologists. Those are the kinds of things that have been the money has been spent on. $865 million of their state has set aside funds to close the digital divide. Hotspots, devices, learning management systems that that we use today that actually are improving our educational outcomes. And 75 million of that to increase student attendance and engagement through a different variety of ways. So with that context, I'm going to just kick us off. I'm going to start with Jason Glass in Kentucky, and I'm going to ask each of our panelists to start us off by talking about what are the ways in which your state has focused on this connectivity through the use of ESSER funds, and what are some of the big things that you're working on?
Thanks, Carissa. It's a delight to be with all of you and such a powerful group of leaders that's here. I'm honored to be part of this conversation. I think Kentucky, like all other states, was really struggling through the pandemic with how do we balance keeping our staff, our students, and our community safe with the needs to have learning keep moving in some meaningful ways. We really saw what we could do with technology. We pushed at what that was capable of, used it in some ways that we didn't know and didn't expect. And we also clearly saw its limitations. So I think we became painfully aware of those limitations and also expanded irrevocably. We're not going back to using technology in some of the ways that we did before. So there were positives from this experience as well as some negatives. I think the way that we approached using these funds, as other states did, was in some ways it mirrored those 2 experiences, trying to keep people safe and trying to return learning or restore learning or make learning better than it was before. Lots of funds expended on masks and PPE and equipment and ventilation systems and things like that. And now lots of money being spent on how can we re-engage students? How can we create meaningful learning experiences for students, both in the short term with summer programs and after school programs and different experiences that students have, different supports that we can put around students, but also longer than that, how can we change the learning experiences, what students experience in school on a day-to-day basis, shifting more toward hands-on, problem and project-based, real-world, authentic tasks and experiences for kids. So I think that sums up Kentucky's experience, and probably a lot like the rest of the world going through much of these same things.
Thanks, Jason. Christina, I'm going to come to you. In DC, a hallmark thing that you've been doing is the high dosage tutoring too, but I'd love to hear your perspective on the overall landscape.
Well, good afternoon. And again, want to echo Jason's greetings. It is just a delight to be gathered first with CCSO and the Reagan Institute, but amongst my colleagues, I think one of the things in the journey is we don't get to spend time with each other. And so I too am really grateful to be a part of the conversation and share the space with you all as I think we've navigated this together. I also really enjoy the theme, the concept of connection and connectivity. It is so much more than the devices. And I think the phases of the pandemic have forced us to think about connection in different ways. And so I will start with physical connection and access to technology. We've worked really hard to launch what we're calling Internet for All, has served over 5,000 students and families and residents to ensure that from the start, while we're in it, and now we're in this period of recovery, our kiddos have had access to technology, which I think was one of our first big learnings, both in the district and across the nation, that having access to high quality and reliable internet is part of this great learning of COVID, that everyone should have access to technology as we navigate what learning was, is, and will continue to be. The second is the topic you raised. We have made a significant investment in high dosage tutoring, high impact tutoring. It is a core component of our learning acceleration strategy. And we are excited that even as we sit here today, kiddos are in our summer acceleration programs and they're getting access to tutors. And it's one of those learnings as well that I think will be with us through recovery and will remain with us as we think about, and I continue to say, in all of our lived experiences, if we hit a learning challenge, those with resources could go home or go to a trusted adult and say, I need extra help. And that help would usually show up in the form of a tutor. What we have learned is getting that access to all children, regardless of where they live, is a critical component of learning recovery. And then last, which I know we will spend a lot of time talking about, it is critically important to me, is the concept of connection through support. And so at the start of the pandemic support looked like virtual coaching. So as Jason referenced, we flooded our schools with all these learning platforms and models and ways of learning and even designing lesson plans. And we provided virtual coaching to literally help individuals learn. You know, it's a lot as educators, we're used to having all the answers. We pride ourselves on being the smartest in the room. And what it takes to say, I actually don't know the difference between Teams and Zoom and Google Meets, which are all different platforms with bells and whistles, but the coaching helped our teachers and leaders be better for our children. And now that has shifted to overall coaching. So we've used our resources to stand up executive coaching for all of our LEAs to ensure that as they are physically navigating themselves and leading through this moment, that they have access to third-party brave spaces where they can process and check their practice and get guidance. And it's been a unique aspect of making sure that, as I say, the people who are leading the recovery are also able to find places and spaces to recover. And so again, really excited to be with you all today because this theme of connection, I do think that's what's going to get us through where we are and to where we need to be.
Thank you, Christina. And Penny, I'm going to come to you and talk a little bit about Tennessee. And I want to just say that this idea of breaking down barriers across all of these points that we've talked about on connections are things that I think we're going to hear from all of you throughout this conversation. So Penny, I'll come to you.
Sure. And I think in Tennessee, especially with the federal relief funds, the strategy that we took around, especially in that theme of connection, is how do we connect this to sustainable projects in the future? So we really wanted to make sure we were not looking at these as one-time funds, because then that's a flash in the pan and it goes away. how do we invest these one-time dollars in a way that will have sustainable and lasting impact? And so we kept it very narrow and went very deep in those. We matched the federal relief dollars with state policy changes and law changes to allow for that sustainability. And then certainly also kind of thought through the different ways that we could ensure that there was buy-in and investment with our districts and not to our districts. And so for us, we kept it narrow on our kind of our big five. Certainly with academics, we had our Reading 360 work. We're super excited now that we're getting the data back about how quickly we are seeing growth as a result of that. We did academic acceleration. And that is at this point, with all of the different components of our Tennessee All-Core Tutoring Program, it'll impact 225,000 students out of the 1 million in Tennessee just in the next 3 years. But we also have sustainable funding tied to that. And we have about 22% of our students who are in summer school every year. So we're excited about that work. Third is kind of innovative school models. We talk a lot about innovation in this country, and like this is our opportunity to really rethink what high school looks like, and that reimagination term that we continue to use. Very grateful that we were able to use our federal relief dollars for some pilots for innovative school models. Those have worked so well for local communities and kind of spurring additional economic investments that our governor proposed and the General Assembly approved $500 million to ensure every high school and every middle school can now redesign the way that they think about high school and middle school moving forward. So that's sustainable work that's now in our funding formula. And then the last two are educators. We'll talk a lot about educators, I'm sure, not just now, but in the years to come. How do we make sure that we get great people in the profession and keep the wonderful, excellent, very smart folks who are in our classrooms every single day and keep them in our profession? And so that is going to be one of the big challenges facing all of us, and especially with my neighbor to the north, and want to make sure that we don't just kind of trade teachers, which I know happens a lot. We need to actually bring more people into the profession and not just kind of have folks move around. And then our last is funding. If we are going to make these one-time funds sustainable, you have to have the law and the policy in place, but you also need to make sure that there's the state commitment and investment to fund those programs moving forward. I feel very lucky in Tennessee, we've done both. But it only matters if we are actually implementing thoughtfully and well. And we know we're implementing well if we see data that matches that. And so I hope that as part of that connectivity, we continue to engage families and teachers and districts, legislators, communities. And we are doing that with a very data-driven approach, so that we know that what we are doing is working and people feel empowered with knowledge and information to continue that work moving forward. And I think that's been kind of the hallmark of a lot of this work across the states. With the very excellent state chiefs that I get to talk with today, and with all of the organizations that have been very helpful. I think that connectivity, both horizontally and vertically, is going to continue to be important if we're going to make this kind of lasting momentum for education in our country.
Yeah, I'll just punctuate on the sustainability and the lasting. And I know we've all talked about that quite a bit. And there's a lot of criticism about how fast we're actually getting that money out there. And I think it's to the credit of state chiefs to be very thoughtful about how we're actually spending the money, and not just spending it. It's spending it and investing it in a way that will be there and that will make an impact for kids long lasting beyond the funds itself. So with that, I will come to Katie in Indiana.
Well, first of all, when Penny said neighbor to the north, I immediately thought Indiana, but then I realized Jason's on the call. So Jason, you're kind of in the squeeze between Tennessee and Indiana there. But I also really appreciate the sustainability point and the intentionality that my fellow chiefs have described. When it comes to Indiana, and you hit specifically on digital connectivity, mental health and wellness, and then the systems piece, I'm going to say focus on that. The digital connectivity, most, if not all states invested in broadband, invested in Wi-Fi, invested in devices. One of the things that we did with our funding is we seeded innovation in technology, which then allowed some local communities to make some big bets, and for us to see from the state perspective what might work. So one of the big bets in the digital connectivity space is in Marion County, which is right in Indianapolis, Indiana's capital. We had probably a situation where the least comfort in teaching digitally, if that makes sense. So not all students had devices. Certainly connectivity was a challenge. The other challenge that was raised is our teachers didn't know exactly what to do or how best practices using technology. And Christina mentioned this, the virtual coaching aspect. So in Marion County, they started a learning lab with state dollars and philanthropic dollars that is meant to have all of the learning right there in one spot, live interaction, professional development from internal and external partners. So the Indiana Learning Lab is one thing that we ended up launching statewide. So we learned from that big bet and took it statewide. And the student and staff well-being area, I'll give you a couple of data points of where we are in Indiana, and this is hard to hear, but it's very real. Our Department of Health just shared that 47% of our students reported saying they felt sad or hopeless almost every day for greater than a 2-week period. And then in 2021, 12% of students reported having attempted suicide. So alarming. Code chills, so alarming. And so noting that, we have made some efforts and have so much left to do, but a couple of things that I will mention. In 2021, Governor Holcomb had this on his agenda, and then our General Assembly supported. All school districts in Indiana are now required to form a partnership with a mental health care provider. And then number two, the state of Indiana through FSSA, who is our mental health agency, has just partnered with Riley's Children's Hospital to provide mental health services across all of our pediatric primary care, because you all know we're limited. When our students have needs, there are limits. So those are a couple I'll mention, but again, it's all about developing that system.
Thanks, Katie. Thanks to all of you. So we're going to shift gears a little bit. We're going to start with all 4 of our chiefs giving some perspective. We'll end the call with that, but we're going to do a little bit of popcorn now, where everybody's going to get a chance to answer each question. That doesn't mean that these chiefs don't have something to say about that. But in the interest of time, we're going to do just a little bit of round robin and do a couple of chiefs on each question. And you are more than welcome to contact any of these chiefs to talk to them about any of the topics we're going to talk about. Let's start with the third connectivity, and that is the connectivity across agencies. When we think about during the pandemic, for example, how important working with Health and Human Services, with various other agencies, nonprofit groups in your areas to deliver for kids became, people just broke down barriers. They just saw that as a necessity. And we talked a lot about making sure that that continued even beyond when we went back to whatever normal is today, right? And so I'd love to start with you, Jason, about how you've worked with your state legislature, your various stakeholders, all these other agencies that you connect to as you've gone forward out of the pandemic.
Sure. Well, I think like everyone else, we have had to work really closely with our state public health department, just looking at the data and trying to determine what the right thing to do in terms of keeping schools open and how we did that. We relied a lot on what other states were doing, paying attention to that, and also international data, looking at countries where the pandemic had progressed more quickly there, or perhaps had resurged or faded away. What were some of the decisions they were making, and what were the outcomes looking like, and trying to use that to inform the decisions that we were reaching here in Kentucky. So close partnerships throughout all of this with the Department of Public Health, Our legislature and governor are of different parties, so they had different priorities when it came to schools. Both of those priorities are really important, but they were competing. On the Republican side, we have a Republican supermajority. They were very interested in get school open and remove any sort of COVID mitigation efforts that were underway. The governor was in exactly the opposite place on that, wanted learning to continue, but really wanted it done safely and leaning more toward keeping things closed down, masks on, and both of those tensions come from good places. We want learning to continue. We want learning to be in person and authentic and meaningful. We also want schools to be safe. And so those were the tension. And it took really everyone, including our legislature and governor, some back and forth pressure on each other to find their way through that. So how do we get school open, and how do we do it safely? And really, I think as the pendulum swung too far in one direction or the other, we paid a price for that. When we rushed to reopen things without thinking through the consequences of that or considering the surge of virus in community, immediately schools had to start shutting down because they were having staffing problems or large number of absences or community outbreaks. At the same time, when we shut things down and restricted that unnecessarily, we heard all kinds of stories about students becoming disconnected, not showing up to meetings, falling behind, mental health, those sorts of issues creeping up. So I think going forward, this virus is not through with us yet. It's part of life on Earth now. And so it's going to be something that we'll have to contend with. I heard someone say at the end of this pandemic, or we're in the middle of this pandemic, I don't know where any of that is anymore, but it's here. It's part of life on Earth. So we're going to have to continue to contend with these things and think about how, at this point, how can we make sure that we keep school open? Because we know that's so vitally important. We saw the power and importance of those human connections. We know we've got years of work to do to try and make up for some of the disruptions to learning and student experiences that we've had. So I think we're going to have to work arm in arm, because everyone, regardless of what political stripes they are, has an interest in their schools being of quality, their schools being open, their communities being safe, and kids having great experiences in those schools.
Yeah. And, I appreciate what you said about like having to come together and having to make decisions together, and how much we learned from that. And Penny, I'm going to come to you, because in Tennessee, the Tennessee Investment in Student Achievement, the TISA Act, you were seeing the fruition of people working together and working across the aisle on that. So you want to talk a little bit about how that's going?
Yeah, and I think for us, TISA, which is our new funding formula, was a really good way to kind of capitalize on a lot of the engagement and investment that happened as a result of coming out of a pandemic in the way that we have. And so, as I had mentioned, that sustainability and consistency that we want to see over time, we had that codified in law in January of 2021, but really needed that funding component to go with the law, and decided that this was the best time for us to redo school funding, because why not? So for us, we wanted to make sure that was a very inclusive process. We took a very different approach than we had in the past, because people are so much more engaged in public education, I think, than we've seen potentially ever before. And so we had 18 subcommittees. We had 16 town halls, 18 subcommittees. Those subcommittees, though, included state board members and members of the General Assembly and teachers and parents and practitioners. But the idea was that on top of all of those components and public comment and hearings, we were able to engage thousands of Tennesseans to say, one, what do I want in my public education system? Not just what do I not like about the old process or funding formula, but what is it that I actually want to help build? How can I be a meaningful part of that creation and development process? And then how can I start to really understand how that connects to what happens for my students in the classroom? And I think being able to be part of something that, was a kind of October through February engagement process, we're now in the second phase of rulemaking. We are seeing that same level of engagement. But I think what is really important that we cannot lose in public ed is this idea that it is informed engagement. It is not the check the box, let me just invite people to something after school. This is about really understanding the details and the content about what's happening, whether that is kind of what students are learning and how we think about really strong parent engagement with literacy at home, making sure books connect in classrooms and in what you're reading at bedtime potentially. We've got a lot of parents who are very interested in that. It could be, I want to be more empowered to know what money is coming into my school system. And so how do I get that information so I can advocate for resources for my child? Or it might look for teachers. Look, we think that we need to have a pretty significant salary increase, which I think many of us agree with. How do we then have a more informed way of advocating for ourselves? And I think that level of information sharing across stakeholder groups is very powerful. We need to make sure that we are empowering folks to have those conversations. And we feel really good about the number of Tennesseans that were able to learn and then engage in an informed way and actually understand the direct connection between their engagement and the impact that it had in law and policy. I don't want us to lose that. And we're starting to replicate that in a lot of different ways because it was a much more robust process than we would have otherwise done for any topic, not just kind of a big one like school funding.
Thanks, Penny. I appreciate that. And there's so much we've learned about the connections across all stakeholder groups and how much time it takes. It takes time and investment. And I appreciated what you said about informed stakeholder engagement. I think we can all take a lot from that, from the time that we spent in the pandemic. I'm going to shift to that second topic, which is mental health and student well-being. And we know that nearly 3 out of 4 schools report the percentage of students seeking mental health services increased since the start of the pandemic. Katie gave us an astounding statistic that is alarming for all of us and is happening across the country from what we can see. So, Christina, I want to ask you about the things that you've put into place in the District of Columbia and what's next for how you're addressing student mental well-being and health, and for teachers.
I'm taking notes while Penny's talking, so I'm certain that folks who are watching are doing the same. But it's such an exceptional opportunity to set policy and regulations to align with your initiatives and ambitions. And so for us in the district, we have worked with our Office of Behavioral Health to ensure that we are putting those individuals and resources in every one of our schools and LEAs, district charter, and having the policy framework and infrastructure to support that over time. So, the unique function of the state is that we see the data, we hear how our students are doing, and then we can work with other agencies to be responsive to those needs. I think another group of students that have been disproportionately impacted through the pandemic are LGBTQ plus students. Just a couple of weeks ago, we launched a $750,000 investment specific to open up spaces for inclusive learning. And so setting up opportunities for schools to create their own inclusive communities, for teachers to have access to high quality professional development for inclusive learners. And so thinking about mental health, not from the perspective of a deficit, but broadening the space and creating opportunities for us as adults to be trained and then to create safe spaces for our children to say that they are not okay. Because one of the significant setbacks from the pandemic and having schools closed for any amount of time is that is truly where children turn first when they need a trusted adult. And so now that we have successfully opened our schools, kept our doors open, we are aligning resources in those schools so that adults are ready when the child or when a teacher says, I am not okay. And so those are two ways and interesting partnerships. I can't echo the way that we have leaned on our partners in health and in behavioral health to learn more about how this work to learn more about how we support each other, getting the individuals inside of our schools, and then having a statewide focus on making sure that work can be supported.
Yeah, and you mentioned addressing needs of students of all different backgrounds, but you've also done some significant work around addressing students with disabilities. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
That's an area of work that, it was work that was prioritized before the pandemic, and exciting. I guess it's appropriate for a state chief to be excited about our work on student disabilities because it's work that we were able to truly accelerate and move forward during this time frame. Because of some of the things you've heard our colleagues say, we could have focus groups and engagement and all of these things using technology that accelerated our ability to get our regulations done, completed, and published. We have partnered with our state board and Office of Ombudsman. As we've reopened, we saw a need for families not to just have to come to our website or physically come to our office. We've launched a special education hub in our community. So families in an area in a community of DC where we see a higher amount of students with disabilities, they now actually have a physical place that they can go with experts on the ground to walk them through every part of a special education journey, from I think there is something happening with my child to I think I have to have an IEP meeting to I think X, Y, and Z. It's a tremendous mitigation strategy in terms of ensuring that families have everything they need while they're navigating it. And then on an accountability side, we're very, very excited that we are launching special education progress reports, where every single one of our LEAs is going to get a report on how they are not just complying with the laws of special education, but how they are actually serving students. We think this will actually help LEAs set new benchmarks and milestones for their improvement, but it also will be an amazing tool for how families can know school by school, LEA by LEA, how are they meeting the needs? And it is fascinating to see where the work was at the start of the pandemic and just how much ground we covered while the pandemic was taking place. And now as we're in the spirit of recovery, it's exciting to see the work living and breathing in community. And so thanks for flagging me and having an ability to be kind of geeked out about work. That's moving forward. Sorry, Carissa,
I'm excited about it too. And I want to punctuate something you said, which is like how much ground has been covered during the pandemic. Because I think there's a lot of things that we all have to work on, right? And there's a lot of discussion about what was lost or what was not happening during the pandemic. And there were plenty of things that were moving faster. And so I think we have to recognize those as well. And then, acknowledge we've got work to do when it comes to student learning. But I do want to acknowledge your statement about how far you guys have come. I also want to give a nod to a couple of your colleagues and some of the work that's going on in mental health. Oklahoma School Counselor Corps. Oklahoma provided funding to 181 LEAs to cover 50% or more of the salary of 150 school counselors and 150 licensed mental health professionals. And Illinois launched a regional network of social emotional learning hubs to train educators to work on mental health for students and to support the students. So just lots of good work going on around the country. I'm going to shift to teachers. That's the next topic that we're going to talk about. We're citing a lot of data here, but I think it's important for us to know where we stand. But according to a recent RAND study, twice as many teachers and principals reported experiencing frequent job-related stress as the general population of working adults. And we, as state chiefs, have talked a lot about concerns both about the pipeline even before the pandemic, but the pipeline and retention of teachers as we go forward. And so we're facing some critical teaching shortages. I'd love, Katie, for you to give us an idea in Indiana, what you're working on the teacher pipeline and how you're addressing some of those needs in Indiana.
Well, I wish I could hop on and say that we have no issues with that in Indiana. I don't know that any state chief can say that. We presently have, and when this is, I don't know if I'm supposed to say this, you might have to edit this part out. So I'm going to tee it up again. As of mid to end of July, we have 2,800 teaching positions open in the state of Indiana. We serve about 1.12 million students. So 2,800. And we're one of the earliest states to start. We have schools going back as early as end of July, with a bulk of them going back in August. So we know that we have urgency to doing everything we can to bolster our educator talent, our educator quality, and I would also add our educator value, making sure our teachers and school leaders and staff are truly celebrated for the work that is happening. A few specific tactical examples I'll mention. Coming in January 2021, one of the first things that we noticed is our data for our teacher pipeline was very lagged, sometimes 2 years behind. So you think about current state, right now I'm able to tell you exactly pretty close to how many teachers we need. We couldn't always do that. So one of the things we launched in order to be able to do that is a teacher supply and demand marketplace. So the teacher demand side was launched in March, which is why I know the exact number for certified and non-certified positions. The supply side, if you think about who is currently enrolled in our educator prep colleges and training programs, and by the way, are they even making it to our classrooms, or are they being recruited out prior to even making it, getting there? And so the supply side will be launched yet this fall, and then we'll start to really understand what is happening in our educator pipeline marketplace so that we can advocate and triage, but most importantly, advocate. I heard Penny say increase teacher salary. Yes, so we can advocate for our teachers. The other thing I'll hit on is we launched this summer attract, prepare, and retain connection summits across the state, so different hubs. And that was not to talk out people like a traditional conference, but to bring all the right people to the room at one time to solution find. So you think about, again, all of our ed prep colleges and training programs with K-12 HR and hiring team members, with Commission for Higher Ed, et cetera, et cetera. That goes also to the partnership and the system. But they developed some solutions, of which we have recently launched a grant, a competitive grant to fund some of the innovations that our locals came up with. I mentioned earlier the big bets that we have to be making right now often start not at the state level, but from our local community level. So that's coming. Last thing I'll mention on this topic with teachers, although it is, we could go on and on, is that value piece. So we heard loud and clear, there's a group called Get Your Teach On that our teachers love, and it lifts them and gets them excited to come back and teach all the students, use all the energy. And so we've built a statewide contract with Get Your Teach On, focus on science of reading, STEM, and just elevating the profession. So we have spots all over our state with free to any teacher, and those are super popular. I'll stop there unless you have follow-up questions. We have a few things going on in this space to fill those 2,800 spots.
Just a few things. Thanks for bringing up the Get Your Teach On. That's that seems like a great program to do some motivating, right? Jason, I'm going to come to you and talk to us about what you're working on in Kentucky. And then Penny, I'm going to swing back to you to talk about the Teacher Apprenticeship work that you've been doing. And Christina, I'll invite you if you'd like to share anything. I'm going to spend a little bit more time on this topic because I think it is such a pervasive problem across all states that I want to get all the perspectives on the table. So Jason, I'll turn it to you.
Yeah, thanks. I really appreciate the ideas that Katie was bringing forward, and every state should have a champion for the profession like Indiana has. So we need more of that. Thank you, Katie, for that leadership. This has been a problem that's been slow rolling at us for a number of years. So we've seen a decade ago declining number of individuals entering our teacher education programs. And we knew that this problem was coming. Coupled with it, we are now seeing that problem fully come home to roost, along with an exodus of people, particularly at the end of their careers, those that are close to retirement age that have options are taking them. So we're seeing that. At least in Kentucky, our data indicates we saw a surge in the number of people leaving the profession that were sort of mid-year. Some of that may be related to the economy when jobs are really plentiful and other higher paying opportunities are available. Sometimes you see people leave the profession. So we saw some of that taking place right now. But we also know that it's been more than decade-long effort at depressing salaries below the rates of inflation, attacks and destabilization of pension systems, politically motivated attacks on the teaching profession. All of these things have a cumulative and corrosive effect that we're now seeing come home to roost. So we, like Indiana, have a large number of unfilled absences. Earlier this month, it was almost 5,000. I hope we were down to Indiana numbers now, but unfilled teaching jobs at the beginning of July, that was really troubling to see that large number. We've seen those positions be increasingly replaced with emergency certification. So you're taking someone with a lesser standard of certification and putting them into that role. Those are at record high numbers. We've seen a number of Band-Aid approaches where we'll just open more alternative pathways up. The numbers on those just don't bear out. All of our alternative pathways have handfuls of people that are going in through those routes when we know the vast majority of our educators are coming through the traditional teacher education program or an alternative pathway connected to a university. So while these alternative pathways serve a place, they bring some talent in, they just aren't at the volume that we need to solve the problem. We need solutions at really the scale of that issue. I am seeing some interest in Kentucky and in our legislature of recognition of this problem and doing something about it. We had a meeting with our interim joint committee on education earlier in June, and they wanted to talk a lot about the teacher crisis that we have in the state. And what could they do about it? So all across Kentucky in communities where we used to have a glut of applicants in elementary education, physical education, social studies, now we're seeing shortages in those areas now. Where we had used to have dozens of applicants for elementary teaching jobs, now they're lucky if they get one or two, and they're hiring whoever they can. So that's a significant problem, and we all have an interest in making sure that we have talented, professional, quality, dedicated educators working in every community in the state. Everyone has that interest. So I think we've got a real difficult conversation to have as a state and a difficult conversation to have as a nation about the institution of education and the profession of teaching. And do we believe that it is a profession? And is this an institution worthy of investing in? So I think those are difficult questions that we're going to have to wrestle with.
Yeah, Jason, and you pointed out the inevitable problem, which is like creating a big enough pipeline so that you're not like, because just retaining is not going to solve the problem here, that the pipeline is really part of the solution. And Tennessee has taken an approach that Penny, I'd invite you to talk about.
Sure. And I would echo, I think, what Katie and Jason have said, just in terms of the challenges. For context, in Tennessee, we have about 65,000 classroom teachers. We've got about 80,000 folks who we would categorize as teachers, whether they are traditional classroom teachers or support. And for us, we've had a consistent just over 1,000 vacancies statewide. That has not increased as a result of the pandemic, but it hasn't gone down either. And that does not include, I think, to Jason's point, your emergency, your permits, your waivers, some of the kind of flexibilities that we offer for a short period of time. Those are just solid. Kids do not have a credentialed teacher or permitted teacher in front of them every day. So for us, we wanted to address some of that kind of challenge in terms of who's in that pipeline and who's certainly prepared on day one. We started the Grow Your Own program using our ESSER funds and certainly kind of expanded that from one school in 2019 or one district in 2019. We now have over 65 and almost all of our ed preps are participating. And that's just in kind of that 2-year period. And that reflects 650 future teachers. And so from a vacancy perspective, just in 3 years, we think this is a good strategy to get people who are well-trained in classrooms where they are needed. From a different perspective, though, it doesn't necessarily continue to increase those who are in the pipeline. So we did a study and found that financial barriers were one of the top 2 reasons that people don't enter the profession, both the cost to become a teacher as well as the salary once you are in the profession. So we were the first state to apply for and receive teaching as an apprenticeable profession, which means that now if you want to be a future teacher, you're able to use those state labor dollars that come from the federal government. You can use those labor dollars to pay for things like tuition, books and materials, et cetera. It also means that those folks are in classrooms studying under a master or mentor teacher for 2 to 3 years before their first day in the classroom. So it eliminates that idea of a first-year teacher, because I think we don't just want more highly qualified folks because we need them to address our vacancies. We want to make sure they're ready on day one. And there's lots of other benefits to becoming an apprentice as a pathway. And we're super excited that our higher eds are making some changes so that they can qualify for those apprentice dollars, because that's a great kind of tuition support for them. And the University of Tennessee is actually the group that we partnered with to have a Tennessee Grow Your Own Center that will provide no cost professional development support and technical assistance to any state or district in the country. Because as I said, people are moving, we share educators all the time, and we want to make sure that this becomes a national conversation. But we do think that becoming a teacher for free, and in this case, getting paid to do so, brings a lot more people into the profession. It brings some excitement back into becoming a teacher. And more importantly, I think it gives folks the very necessary and important development and experience so that they know they actually want to do the job on day one, and they're prepared to do so. So we're very excited about that, and just kind of the early wave of interest and what that's done for vacancy reduction in our state.
Thanks, Penny. And Christina, I'll wrap this conversation up about teachers with you. You have a unique situation where in the greater DMV, where trading across state lines is often happening. So give us your perspective. Where are you at on this?
Yeah, I've been nodding along. One, I think, I guess I'll conclude this section where Jason started. I think you look across 4 very different contexts and you hear the same theme, that as a nation, we have to revisit the profession of teaching, the importance of teaching. We have to re-engage a national conversation around why people should become teachers. I can't speak for all of my colleagues, but you remember the moment where someone gave you 20 to 30 little people and trusted you to take them on an educational journey. And it is, I'm biased, it is, one of the best career decisions someone should make. And we need to align as a country on that topic. It's the only thing that will preserve democracy regardless of political affiliation. And so I wanted to lift that into this space. And then we've done all the things that you've heard. DC is uniquely positioned in that we do trade almost daily with our neighbors to our north and our south. And so we have had to look at our licensing credentials to make sure that they mirror our neighbors so that there is no barrier to entry. But the work around growing your own and the partnership we've done with our higher education partners really has transformed individuals getting access and getting qualified and being ready for day one. And we too have really worked to limit any of the financial barriers to entering into the profession. What's interesting, through our Teacher Advisory Council, I spend a lot of time directly talking to teachers and get a lot of credibility because I was one. And what we're hearing from teachers directly is it isn't about no longer wanting to be in the profession. I think the pandemic has dramatically changed for teachers what it means to actually teach. And so we are opening up conversations around flexible modeling, flexible teaching schedules. What does it mean to have an A schedule and a B schedule? Can teachers achieve a 4-day teaching week while still having a 5-day week of school? Those are the types, a 5-day week of school. Yeah. Those are the types of things that we are entertaining as we talk about innovative school modeling. So it's no longer just a conversation around project-based learning or the traditional Carnegie unit, but teachers are really pushing us in DC to actually think about teacher workload, teacher apprenticeship, teacher modeling. How do we make the profession something that brings people in and allows them to sustain. And I think, and I know, talking directly to teachers and unpacking what they lived through and experienced through the pandemic will force us to have a better education system if we actually see it through the lens of teaching. And so our teachers have told me that, they're not leaving because they want to leave, they're leaving because there are new ways that they've thought about the work, and we have to meet them in that new way of thinking. I do think that we're going to come out on this better for the profession. First, we have to acknowledge as a nation that we have to have a different conversation. And then I think at the state level, we are going to have to rethink the way schools and instructional days are designed. That will also allow us to keep our children safe and learning, but also pay homage to all that the teachers have taught us over this journey.
That's a great message, Christina, because I think throughout this conversation, you all have talked about new models, and what we learned. And it is so easy to snap back to what we've always known. And the gravitational pull towards that is going to keep us mired in that. And we're going to continue to have the same teaching shortages that we've seen, even pre-pandemic. So I appreciate that message from all of you. I'm going to spend one more question on this middle bucket of connectivity. And it's, Katie, I'm going to come to you. It's related to the high quality career pathways and how education to employability. It's related to teachers, but it's also about what we're doing for our students. And it's, it was one of the newer models a while ago, but it helps us look towards the future about what we do with education. So I'll give you a moment to say something there. And then we're going to come back to the conversation around connectivity, the very first one we talked about, connectivity in digital and devices. So Katie.
So in Indiana, we believe wholeheartedly in order to maximize the impact for our students, we have to blur the lines between K-12, higher education, workforce, economic development, and really make sure there's connective tissue across the board, seamless pathway. So I'm going to start where I started with our educator pipeline and hit hard on the data. In Indiana, probably like most states, when it comes to student learning and skill development, we had a variety of reports scattered throughout, but there was no connectedness on what is happening between early learning, K-12, higher ed, post-secondary outcomes. So we are launching the Indiana GPS, the Indiana Graduates Prepared to Succeed, which is a place where the full education to workforce continuum data will all be present. Our goal is to build a data story, so it's very clear for the average person, for our target audience, which could include parents, educators, other stakeholders. If a student cannot read by third grade, what is the implication 10 years after? If a student does not have access to advanced coursework in middle school, what are the implications thereafter? So starting with the data and then also hitting on what indicators matter most. For so long, we focused on knowledge. Can they master math? Can they master ELA? Sort of science and social studies, right? I mean, that is part of our federal expectation there, but we know that skill development is also a really important. So we're launching a partnership with America Succeeds, as well as several school districts across Indiana, to get to how we might measure skill development. How do we measure communication, collaboration, work ethic? That we're wanting to peel that back. The final thing I'll hit on is the supporting of innovation in this space. So we launched the 3E grant. The 3E grant stands for in order to make sure all students have a pathway to employment, enrollment, and enlistment. We have to offer experiential learning, including access to credentials of value for all students, and access to high quality work-based learning at the high school space. The rethinking that Christina talked about is so key. And then in elementary and middle school, we have to make sure we have significant opportunities for engagement and exploration in those careers. So it lights the fire of purpose in kids. They want to be a part of it. They want to experience the work-based learning and the credentials at that high school level. The only other thing, and I think I just said the only other thing, I'm going to say the only other thing one more time. And so I talk about supporting innovation, but we also have to get these barriers out of the way. And that might mean we rethink what a high school diploma is. that we listen to one of the laws that just passed our General Assembly this past session is a work-based learning law. We heard from multiple industries saying, well, we can't have students under 18 into our companies, so we can't participate, right? And I think they want to, I really do. And so our General Assembly has required our department to work with a statewide entity, which will be our Indiana Chamber of Commerce, to procure employer liability and workers' comp insurance to cover our high school students as they go into that work-based learning space. I'll pause there. I'm sure others have a lot to add.
Thanks, Katie. We're gonna touch on the very first connectivity piece here, which was around, the digital connections, the devices, the broadband, all of those kinds of things, which, we spent an inordinate amount of time focused on and thinking about early in the pandemic. I'll just give a nod to New Jersey, who's not on this panel, but New Jersey, who did Bridging the Digital Divide grants. And on top of that, they collected and reported data on device and connectivity needs on a weekly basis until every student had access, which is really important. It's just important that we know that that's the case and we don't make the assumption of that. But in Kentucky, Jason, it's unique in that you have one single system. So I want to just touch on that, and then we're going to wrap this panel with some final thoughts. So Jason, tell us about Kentucky's unique system.
Well, it's really a decision that was made a long time ago to have the entire state on the same network, the same system of standards around devices and enterprise-wide systems like security and learning management and the student information system. So all of that is unified, which has had a tremendous been a tremendous support as we went through the pandemic, making sure that we had access and going that last mile. So we had good connectivity in our community schools. We were able to extend that out in a variety of ways into communities, and like everywhere else, had to eventually start resorting to mobile devices and hotspots to get that last step. But covering 90-95% of the state with the network that you have was a huge benefit. And then going forward, I think we've shattered through this question of, are we going to be one-to-one? That was a question that was pre-pandemic, as when do we make that move? How do we make that move? When's the right time? Everybody is at that point now. And even though, as I said earlier, I think we've pushed against the limits of what these devices can do and seeing some of their limitations in learning, we also know that they are incredibly valuable communication tools, incredibly valuable research tools and productivity tools. And they're going to be devices that our students are going to be working with when they become adults and leave our schools. So all of those things together mean that technology is going to continue to be really important for us going forward. So whether you're in a state like Kentucky that has a unified system or something that's more district driven and there's more variability, the same questions are going to be there. How do you ensure that you've got connectivity available for students with an equity lens on that question? And how do we make sure that we have quality devices that students can use so that they can be productive citizens and workers when they leave our schools?
Absolutely. And I'm sure people would like to hear more about Kentucky's unified system, because it probably creates a lot of streamlining that would be incredibly helpful. And I know Jason would be happy to talk about that. So I'm going to wrap us with just some final thoughts from each one of our chiefs. I want to just say, throughout this pandemic, chiefs have played an essential role in providing clarity and guidance and navigating the ups and downs of the pandemic. And in some cases, it was not even a 24-hour period when things would change and you would need to put out new guidance. They've encouraged implementation and evidence-based practices. You've heard that today. They've leveraged the economies of scale to achieve statewide reach, taken on risk and minimizing duplication, and focused on sustainability as a key focus here. And they're administering the largest infusion of federal funds in K-12 education in history. Not a small task at all. So I'm going to give them each just a minute to give you a final thought and something they want you to take away from this panel. I'll start with you, Christina.
Oh, I didn't want to go first, but If I must. No, I think it's interesting. I come from a military family, and I came into the pandemic kind of grounded in like, oh, this is an effort. This is a nationwide effort, and we're going to navigate it through. And we are uniquely situated to marshal resources, build relationships, make strategic decisions, and push the ball forward to achieve the victory. And so I came into this with the spirit of, oh, we will defeat this microscopic enemy. The question is, will we be a better school system on the other side? And so it is a unique, historic opportunity of significant investments in education. And I think as a nation, we all came through this or going through this realizing that school is critically important, not just because it's the place where adults trust their little people with us every single day, but because the school is the core, it's the foundation of the society that we exist on. What our children do when they earn their credential, who they become as a citizen in the states, and as they advocate or participate in democracy. We learned through the pandemic how critically important it is to keep the doors open, to keep our children safe, and more importantly, to keep them learning. And so I leave this space grounded in the theme of connection. I hope you've had a chance to see that we as state chiefs are connected to each other. You should see a through line between what we're standing up, regardless of our physical location, because we are aligned on what it will take to navigate this moment in time, but put children in learning first. And so I am hopeful that we will find ourselves gathered in these communities more often to share practices, to learn and leverage from each other. But we will get through this, and we will be a better school system as a country if we are very mindful of all that we've learned and just how fast we can move to change things when we are all aligned on what is needed to be done.
Thank you, Christina. Penny.
So I think for me, especially in this theme of connectivity, is just momentum and inertia are powerful things. And so if we know that we are building momentum related to moving the ball for student achievement, that is ultimately our first and foremost responsibility with all of the things that surround that. We've got to make sure that we don't lose that focus. And it's easy to do that. So for us, certainly in Tennessee, it will continue to be, how do we match policy, program, and funding together that is alongside and in partnership with our districts and our local communities, that it is not a top-down effort, but that it is everybody moving in the same direction towards the same goal. And I think that kind of moment in time that we've been able to establish here in Tennessee has been very powerful for us. I think that and I certainly hope that our investments, both in capacity and time, as well as funding, continue to be for the benefit of kids, because that's ultimately what we're here to do, is to support our students and ensure that they have better life outcomes than they otherwise would have had if we did not take certain actions. And so there's a huge responsibility on all of us to do that very well, because if we do not, we know that the implications are just more severe than they otherwise would have been. But I continue to be very encouraged by the people on this call, and all of my colleagues across the state, because state work is very hard. You've got federal, state, and local that you're all kind of reporting to and working with. And it is a very big task and incredibly important that we all stay connected together so that we are moving in the same direction on behalf of kids.
Thanks, Penny. Katie.
So this will be my fastest answer of the day. Shocking to everyone on this panel. Number one, everyone listening has to have an urgency to make some big bets. We can't boil the ocean. What do you believe will drive the change? Make the big bet, make the investment if it means improving the learning for kids. And then we have to learn from that. Either way, the good, the bad, the ugly. What's the return on investment? Did it work? Did it not? Let's invest as a country, as states, certainly, in what is working. And then thirdly, we have to be nimble enough to empower the change. And we have no time to waste.
Thank you, Katie. Jason, we'll close with you.
Well, thanks. So Christina talked about how difficult it was going first, so it's worse to go last. I'll tell you that. I just ditto to what everyone else has said. The only thing that I will add is that we'll get through these sort of immediate urgency of learning loss. We've got work to do on that. We've already seen nice improvements and gains that have happened over the course of this past year with assessments around sort of catching up on the content that students have been missing out on. But even more important, can we create schools that are better than they were before? Can we make learning more meaningful, more authentic, more engaging than it was before? So I think that is really the long-term challenge that's before us, is how can we not just come back from this pandemic, but come back stronger from this pandemic?
Thank you, Jason. And I just want to extend a deep gratitude and thank you to the panelists today, for our chiefs for giving of their time and for their authentic answers and giving you an insight into the work that they're doing. I also want to thank the Reagan Institute. They've done a great job of bringing us together by focusing in on the connectivity, the things that we need to do to keep working together. I know that the audience is wide and large, and we invite you to join us as the state chiefs and CCSSO in the work that we've laid out and what needs to be done, because we're going to be better together when we're connected and when we do this together to make sure that education is right for all kids. Thank you.